Now that we've gone over our animation example with a ball in great detail, we can pivot back over to the Tinder Swipe application that we want to start working on. So in this section, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the setup for the Tinder Swipe deck, and then we'll start working on a little bit of the implementation. Putting this swipe deck together is going to be a pretty solid challenge. So some of the stuff is going to be pretty intense, but it's going to be a great opportunity for learning a lot of stuff about animation with React Native. So let's get started. The first thing I want to do is remind you just a little bit about how the component should work. So I want to have the ability to show multiple cards to the user, and they should be able to swipe right or swipe left. Now there's a couple of very particular, is probably the correct word to say, very particular aspects to this animation, some things that the user is probably going to expect. So as a reminder, once they start swiping right or left, we want to kind of rotate the card at the same time as well. In addition, we want to make sure that as the user starts to swipe far enough to the right that they hit some threshold, the card should automatically continue to drag out to the right-hand side or like off the screen essentially, and the next card should appear for the user to start dragging. So there's a lot of very interesting aspects to this animation challenge that we're going to be working on. The first thing I want to talk about with this component in particular is some of the different props that we're going to pass to it. So we're going to design this component from the outside in, so to speak. And I want to be very aware of the different data that we're going to expect our user, or really our developer, to use with this component. So we'll come back to this diagram right here several times as we work on each of these different props. I more just wanted to give you an example ahead of time just to make sure that it's really clear that we're going to design this as a reusable component that you can go off and use, so you can use this on your own projects really. So just a very quick overview. A couple of these things are going to be functions that we pass in. So render card will be responsible for returning an individual card. So that's going to be a prop that we're going to pass in, and I'll show you an example of this in just a second. We're going to have a function to call when there are no more cards or no more pieces of data for the user to swipe through. We're going to have an array of objects or a data array, and that's a list of records that we want to use for cards. So remember, in theory, the user is swiping through many different items here, and so we're going to need a good pipeline of items to show to the user. So this data prop is going to be the array of objects that the user is really swiping through. Then we're also going to have two callback functions, onSwipeRight and onSwipeLeft. So we'll pass in onSwipeRight and onSwipeLeft as props or as functions. And those will be called whenever the user swipes left or swipes right on an item. So just kind of a practical use case or a practical example of this. These might be some of the props that we see when we pass to this swipe deck component. So we might pass in a data prop, which would be an array of objects. So we would have a title of great title and a title of terrible title. Not very original, but whatever. So that's reflected in the first two cards that you see up here. So the first card would have a title of great title coming from right there. And the second one would have a title of terrible title. So there's the second one right there. In this prop array of data, I only passed in two records. So once the user swipes through both this first one and the second one, they would then see a card that is meant to be displayed whenever there are no more cards available for the user to swipe through. And so that's handled by the prop render no more cards down here. So see render no more cards, we're saying if there are no more cards for the user to swipe through, we'll show them some text that just says no more cards. So again, I just wanted to give you a good preview of some of the props or some of the ways that we're going to interact with this swipe deck component. So let's take a quick break. Let's come back and we're going to start working on the design and outlining, putting together some of the boilerplate together for this swipe deck.